welcome back to my channel, my reading corner. My name is Tumi and I'm so glad that you decided to click on this video today. So in today's video, I am going to be doing my part 2 review of The State of Africa by Martin Meredith, right? So as you all know, or as some of you might know, I've been reading this book. I started it last year, 2020, then I DNF'd it, and now I have picked it up. I have done a part 1 review, which I'll link in the description box. So if you want to read, or if you want to watch that as well, then you can just get a sense of what part 1 is about. So this book is a 4-part book, just talking about the 50-year journey to independence of various African countries. The book is by Martin Meredith. So yeah, I think let's just jump right into it. If you have just been following me briefly on Instagram, I have spoken a bit about, and if you've watched my Feb and March wrap up, I did mention that part 2 is stressful. That's literally, that's how I can describe part 2. Part 1 was very inspiring. Part 2 is just stressful, and the reason that I'm saying is that we are reading a lot now about the downfall of many African countries, and this is mostly due to the leaders now becoming greedy and disillusioned by power. You know, we see revolutionaries who led their countries basically to independence now getting corrupt. They are looting their states. They are so involved in self-enrichment as you read part 2 that it's stressful. And because I'm reading part 3 now, it doesn't even get better, you know. So all those inspiring stories and just the hopeful nature that you start the book with in part 1, part 2 is so demoralizing. But I'll use the word stressful and then I'll use demoralizing for part 3. I only read just 1 chapter in part 3, so I don't know. But yeah, basically part 2, we now see the Russians, the Cubans, and the Chinese enter the fight for influence over Africa. And basically this fight over influence is a battle between capitalism and socialism. That's mostly what it is, you know. You'll see some of the leaders lean towards socialist views, and you'll see some lean towards capitalist views with the influence of some of these, like the Russians. Yeah. So let's start off with the first chapter in part 2, which is the birth of nations. We are now talking, well, I'm not going to go chapter by chapter, but I'll just tell you generally. So most of us know one of the most revered African leaders, Emperor Haile Selassie, right? And we know how he led Ethiopia to independence. Now what we read about in part 2 is just this extravagant and grandeur life that the emperor lived. You know, I mean, he had the thing that stood out for me here was the fact that Emperor Haile Selassie had a pillow bearer who basically went with him everywhere that he went, so that he could lay pillows every time, so that the emperor just steps on his pillows, you know. I think also the authors is very exaggerated sometimes, and I think what I've picked up is that a lot of his writing sometimes is a little bit subjective, but yeah, I think he does give a really good account of what happened in a particular country, but you might read it sometimes and find little hints of, it does sound like it's very subjective. But anyway, for the most part, it's facts that he lays out for us. But yeah, the pillow bearer thing was just very, very funny for me. You all know, or most of us might know, that the emperor had lions at his palace. And the way Martin Meredith describes it is that on which he used to feed these lions on his morning walk, and that's when ministers were giving him the gossip report, is what he calls it. So just reading about that grand and extravagant lifestyle that the emperor lived. And so the author talks about how the emperor let a famine continue in Ethiopia while him and his cronies continue to live basically the champagne life. And I have to say that the story of Ethiopia, like many of the African countries, is a very sad one. But I think the one of Ethiopia does stand out because a lot of people might know that one, in the fact that there was famine during during Emperor Haile Selassie's regime, and there was also famine during Emperor Haile Mengistu's regime, which we read about in part 3, and you'll see I'm doing a vlog on part 3. So just the grand lifestyle that the emperor lived and his cronies. But it was just so sad, obviously, when later in the chapter read about how he was dethroned, and we know most of his family members were imprisoned, and they were only released like a few years ago, literally, and he was dethroned. He was imprisoned, and it's very, very hard to believe that an emperor who lived that lavish lifestyle died like that in prison. Like, he died in prison, and even was buried reportedly underneath a toilet. So so the story of Ethiopia is the first story that we read about in part 2, and it just doesn't get any better, I'll tell you that. Now, Zanzibar, this beautiful island that it is today, and of course what I've realized is that tourist wise, you see the beautiful white sandy beaches and all of that, but obviously when you do get to see the mainland and the community of Zanzibar, but just the story, and when you see this beautiful picture of Zanzibar, you would ignorantly think that it has always been like that, but it hasn't, so this for me was a new story, or it was a new piece of history that I didn't know about, and I just didn't think about even researching, right? So Zanzibar were introduced to, and I'm looking at my notes here because a lot that I really noted, because I really need to get a lot out. So we are introduced to Abed Karuma, who led the Revolutionary Council in Zanzibar. And the author describes the history of Zanzibar's independence as vindictive and very weird from the onset. Abed Karuma was a dictator. His picture apparently had to be in every household in Zanzibar. And the author describes him as not being a particularly smart man. The reports in the book is that he did not, develop any coherent policy, and he banned contraceptives in Zanzibar. He even suspended the malaria prevention program in Zanzibar because apparently, Africans are malaria proof. No surprises there that there was a surge of malaria in the country, so it is quite stressful. I did say to you guys, right? Very, very stressful. So another story of grandeur unsurpassed by any other African leader is that of the Central African Republic. Here we are introduced to John Bedell Bokassa. The author describes the man as a porn-addicted cannibal, basically. Also Zod described as being very smart. He had 17 wives, many mistresses, and 55 official children. he, of course, looted the state. He spent about $22 million on a coronation where he crowned himself as emperor, even though the people of the country were against that, but, and I get the feeling that he wasn't bothered by France colonizing the CAR, and as a result, France indulged his lavish lifestyle. Like I said, he was a tyrant. He was a dictator. His picture had to be on every textbook in the country. I mean, how crazy is that? He named schools, hospitals, road development projects, clinics, even the university. He named them all after himself. He held 12 ministerial positions. In addition to being the leader of the country, he held 12 ministerial positions, and he got involved in all the others. Like, what is this? And to think that the people of the CAR had to endure this man's rule for 15 years is just quite disturbing. I think also what's more disturbing is the fact that 100 children, and I get the fact that children all over Africa died in large numbers, but like 100 children died at his order. He participated in their beatings and killings, when they spoke up and there was an uprising against John Badal Bokassa of the Central African Republic. Small country, but yeah, very sad history. Part 2 covers Uganda's national hero, Idi Amin. The West described him as cruel and brutal, but Idi Amin was regarded as something of a hero throughout Africa, by expelling the Asian community from Uganda and attacking Western imperialism. He was revered throughout Africa, or across most of Africa, and for me, I feel like Idi Amin started out really, really well. He disbanded the secret police. He lifted emergency regulations. He released political prisons. He began adopting conciliatory measures, so he started out really, really well. But of course, things had to go terribly, terribly wrong. For one, the author describes Idi Amin as not being very intelligent and not knowing the first thing about the business of government. Equatorial Guinea only enjoyed independence for 145 days. Literally that. And then they lived a nightmare for like the next 11 years under the rule of Francisco Nguema. A very mentally unstable man, as described by the author. I was deeply troubled by just the way the man killed people. And also, guys, I don't want to reveal a lot because I really do want you to read this book. It is quite interesting to read about the history. Very disheartening, very sad, but and I will add as a side note that part 2 is really just traumatizing. The killings, guys, by these revolutionaries. Ugh. I was so relieved when now I read about Tanzania's Julius Nyerere, or affectionately known as Mwalimu in Tanzania. So Mwalimu means educator. Mwalimu valued education. He was a very humble man, and if you've watched any of his documentaries, you will even hear it in his voice, and the author sort of mocks his socialistic, or his ideals on socialism. Granted, I also think socialism is a little bit idealistic. But unlike all the other leaders that I've read about so far in part 2 up to this point, Mwalimu introduced socialism as a way to uplift his country, and at no point did he turn into a dictator. And I think the story of Tanzania is one where you see if socialism is implemented in the right way, it really does have benefits for the country. And of course, he was criticized by some people, but for the most part, his views and his strategies did benefit Tanzania. There were other countries like Tanzania with very good stories to tell. It's just that the book doesn't go deep into those ones, but there were. A good example of that is that of Botswana. I mean, today, even today, Botswana's story is a good one. Led by Seretse. The country implemented strategies for economic development. They invested in education, infrastructure, and health. But the book doesn't talk a great deal, doesn't go deeper into those countries with a good story to tell. And yeah, pretty much the rest of part 2 is pretty much a downward slippery slope of tyrants, dictators, and economies just going poop down the drain. To sum up part 2, I would use 2 words: stressful and unfortunate, really. And that's the State of Africa Part 2 review, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. It's a bit all over the place, but I tried to put in as much of my thoughts as possible without also giving out too much, because I really do encourage people to go and read the history of our beautiful, beautiful continent. In as much as we do read these bad stuff, the author does still talk about how it led to this, so there were good days. Granted, Equatorial Guinea only had 145 of those days. Unfortunate. But the story is important to know, and yeah. I'm really enjoying the book. I'm really learning a lot about the book, and I'm so committed to finishing this book. And I will close it here today. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing, and also following me on social media. I'll put all my social media links down below, and I hope we can continue this conversation on social media. Cheers, guys.